nature or nurture, both genetic tendencies, but also, the behavior of the mom or if the dad is in that unit, or maybe another dog that is a member of that household. These could all be factors, even people within the household.
Welcome to the Pet Care Report podcast by Pet Summits. Here's your natural dog healthcare host, Alora Mckinley.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you and bring you another podcast. I'm here with Dr. Rob Silver. Now, if you don't know him, he is a holistic and integrative vet. He's got 40 years experience. I'm so excited to talk to you today because we're talking about pet anxiety, aren't we?
We are, and I'm pretty excited myself.
Yeah.
Not anxious, though.
Yeah. So a bit of a background about yourself. You are the leading authority on pet CBD and cannabis, and you've now shifted your focus to therapeutic mushrooms, and you're working on palatable and effective mushroom products specifically adapted to pets. And you're really passionate about this emerging field. Dr. Silver dedicates himself to educating pet parents worldwide and veterinarians and sharing your expertise on mushroom use to improve health.
Exactly, which is why I'm here.
Yes. Yep. So pet anxiety, what specifically are we talking about? Are we talking about just when a dog cries, when I leave? What kind of things show that my pet is anxious?
Well, there's things that happen that make us all anxious briefly and then it's over. Yeah. But in terms of when we talk about anxiety as kind of a condition that needs to be addressed, it is ongoing. And oftentimes there's like a baseline level of anxiety that is very easily triggered by a number of different things, which oftentimes are more specific to each animal. It's not like there's one thing that will send all animals into anxiety. So we're seeing more and more of that these days. And we live in a world in which, the companions for the pets also may be experiencing anxiety. We know how pets and people don't just look alike. Oftentimes they think alike and feel alike. So I'm sure there's also that factor as well.
Yeah.
Anxiety can be pretty toxic, really, in some dogs. It causes them to be reclusive, or sometimes it causes them out of fear to react and bite or be aggressive. Some dogs out of fear, like I've seen some, like when a thunderstorm comes rolling in and they're very frightened by those noises, to actually jump through a plate glass window. Or with separation anxiety, where a dog feels, anxious and scared because their primary person isn't there anymore. I've seen some that have clawed their way literally through wooden doors to get out. So it's not something that's just, they don't feel good or, they're nervous. It's really much more deep-seated and unfortunately much more difficult to treat, as a condition.
Yeah. And we know that anxiety not only affects the way they behave, but it also affects the way their whole body functions. I know stress has a huge impact on gut health and how your dog is actually going to metabolize things.
Absolutely. They have this condition that's called irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, which we see it in humans. We also have it in our critters. And the cause of that primarily is what we call neurogenic. Comes from up here, comes from the nerves, and so that's, it can really affect digestion. Sometimes they'll manifest their nervousness by scratching at themselves. We might think they've got allergies when in fact it's just kind of an obsessive habit that helps them to feel better, through their anxiety, because, everyone kind of does things that help them feel better, and sometimes if you're anxious, maybe you just kind of, some people, maybe they twirl their hair, they bite their nails, they do these things, and dogs do as well to help them self-medicate for their anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what are the sources of pet anxiety? Is it just the way that they've been raised, or is there more to it?
Well, it's a number of things. I wish it were just one thing, because then it'd be much more easy to address. But, I think some of it may actually occur, early on, once they're born, even within the litter. There can be, certainly if they're strays and they're born out in the wild and then they get taken into a shelter, some of those early experiences could lead them to be anxious and frightened. Puppies need to be with their mother for much longer than most people let them be. Puppies really should be with their mom for at least 8 to 12 weeks. Most of the time when people are raising puppies, they try to get rid of them by 6 weeks of age. So that also is another way that anxiety is created, because they're being separated from their primary source of comfort.
Yeah.
Then there could be genetic tendencies as well.
Yep. And we know that the mother dog's behavior actually influences the puppies, don't we?
Absolutely, nature or nurture, both genetic tendencies, but also, the behavior of the mom, or if the dad is in that unit, or maybe another dog that is a member of that household. These could all be factors. Even people within the household, especially if you've got, anxiety, or you've got, anger in the household, things that are, not emotionally very stable, and the dogs are exposed to that. Sometimes people take their own stuff out on pets in the household by kicking them or hitting them or yelling at them, or, so I mean, there's so many different sources that can create it. And that can make it more difficult to identify how we can reduce it. We may not be able to make it go away, but maybe we can make it a little bit, lower the volume a little bit, in terms of how they react.
Yeah. And I know food also has a big impact too on dogs, whether they're dry fed, raw fed, or...
Oh my gosh, yeah. We talk about how our kids, they eat all these processed foods, all the McDonald's, all the chocolate, all those other things, and how that affects their behavior. And I'm a strong proponent of home prepared meals, or fresh food, fresh wholesome food. The more processed food is, the more likely it is to have that kind of an effect on an animal. And there's other things as well. We know, for instance, that high protein in diets for some pets increases their aggressiveness. And there's some studies that actually support that that's true. So yeah, food is very important. There's some foods that are very calming, and can help to settle them down. And maybe if you have a dog that's a bit aggressive, you may want to look at a lower protein diet, one that has more fresh vegetables and those sorts of things. Fish oil, there's supplements and things that we would put in food, like fish oil, for instance, which those fatty acids in fish oil can be very settling to the nervous system, very calming to the nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I picked up a foster dog yesterday, and I was a bit worried because I thought she'd be quite anxious on the car ride home. So I made sure I took my supplements, and she had a great ride home. So it's just little things sometimes to ensure that, they are calm.
You foster dogs at home?
Yes, I do occasionally.
What a nice gift that you do. How many do you have at home right now?
Yeah, I've got 3 dogs of my own, and I picked up one yesterday who was due to be euthanized. So she's great.
Good for you.
Yeah, she's really good. It's such a sad situation. Anyway.
Yeah. My own dog, Ollie, was found at 3.5 months of age as a stray with a broken leg and a dislocated hip. And he was put into a shelter, which was a kill shelter. There was no vet there, so there was no one to administer pain meds. And he was slated to be euthanized the very next day. And someone like you, a good Samaritan, came by and called. He's a Labrador, so they called this lab rescue group that's in Colorado, where I live. He was in Texas, and they sent a pilot down to pick him up, flew him back. And then they have a monthly newsletter, and I saw his picture, and he was just so cute. So I actually speak from personal experience when I'm talking about anxiety, because Ollie has a lot of anxiety all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine going through so much early in his life. That would have really affected him.
Yeah, and I've worked hard on it. He still has many moments that he's still pretty anxious. There's times if the cat gets up on the counter and I say something to the cat with a loud voice, Ollie slinks off out into the corner because he thinks I'm yelling at him.
Yeah. So in terms of training, what kind of things did you do with your dog to help with his anxiety?
Well, I think the first thing, training is super, super important. Behavioral training. I don't really like the word obedience training, but it's probably correct, at least technically correct. But I think that training your dog, whether it's as you get it as a young puppy or whatever age you get it, is a way of establishing a language between you and your dog. And it's so important because it creates a connection, and they learn to listen to you. And that can be very important for their safety. If you're out walking with them and let's say they see a rabbit and they run across the street to go catch it because they're and pull the leash out of your hand, you want to be able to say stop because maybe there's an incoming car that could hurt them. So I think so training is really important. And I think once you can establish that kind of connection, that kind of language, then I think you have a much better chance. I think the animal will feel much more secure. I think dogs want to please their parents. And I think they just want to know what to do that. And they don't really understand us until we kind of do it repetitively and kind of show them what the words that we mean, what we say mean. And once we get that connection, I think we're much able then to go to the next step. And when it comes to anxiety, in terms of the original question you asked, when it comes to anxiety, one of the first things that we look for is what triggers it. What triggers it? Like, let's take a dog who has separation anxiety. And, like everybody, we have the things that we do before we leave the house, whatever it might be. We turn this light off, we check the refrigerator, and we grab our keys. And it could be, we don't even know we're doing these things, but our dog does. They're very aware. They observe. They know what patterns of behavior we have. They see that behavior. They go, oh no, I'm going to be left alone, and that's when they start to get wound up with their anxiety. So one of the things I've observed with treating them, whether it's with a pharmaceutical or a supplement or even just loving them and calming them down, is that if you can catch them before their anxiety gets big, there's kind of we call it a wind up. They get anxious and then they get more anxious because their anxiety breeds more anxiety. So if you can catch them early in the process, you have a much better chance of reducing it or modifying it or making it easier to be. It's the same thing with pain. In pets and people, there's something we call wind up with pain, which means early on the pain's not so bad, but once the pain gets really bad, it's a lot harder to treat. You have to use higher dosages, and they wind up being not safe if you're using opiates and even NSAIDs as well. So trying to find those cues and then modifying the human's behavior, to avoid those cues. If it's something like thunder phobia or fear of loud noises or fireworks on holiday celebrations, then oftentimes, because those thunderstorms can come rolling in from a long distance, and the change in the air pressure from the thunder and the lightning are things that we can't even hear, our dogs can hear long before it ever gets to us. So in those kinds of situations, in some parts of the world, these thunderstorms are seasonal. So you can sort of predict that at least we're in those 3 months where we're going to have those afternoon thunder showers. Then in those cases, I recommend putting them on something, and I recommend supplements far more than I recommend pharmaceuticals. I think they're actually more effective. I think they work with the animal better, especially if they're part of a training program. But I then suggest using the supplements on a daily basis at kind of like a baseline level. And then when you're aware that the dog's getting wound up, because you may not hear it, but you may see their action, then I would go ahead and add a higher dosage or add something else. Like mushrooms, for instance, can be very helpful to lower kind of the level of anxiety in the nervous system, but they have to be given really every day to be effective. And they're helpful, but they're not drugs, and it's not like CBD, which is very drug-like. So maybe a strategy of using mushrooms every day, to keep them down and calmer. And then when you hear the thing coming in, then using something like essential oils or CBD or combinations of that can help then to lower it even more. So that hopefully they won't react in a way that's dangerous to themselves or to you.
I love this topic that we're going to go down. So I think supplements can be used in combination with training. So
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because we want to allow them to be able to be trainable, but sometimes a dog is so stressed that we can't train them.
Exactly.
That's what I mean.
Exactly. It's we say that you have to get their attention, and they have to be able to listen. And there's when you read some of the evidence, some of the studies that have been done and some of the reports of the effectiveness of certain mushrooms and of CBD, one of the things that it talks about is it helps to clear the mind. It helps to organize your thoughts. It doesn't just sedate you. It doesn't just stop you from feeling those things. What it actually does is it really affects mentation and cognition and the expression of those emotions. So
I think sometimes too, pet parents don't consider supplements as being an effective treatment. I think sometimes they go to their vet and say, my dog has this anxiety and these are their symptoms. And the vet sometimes just hands out some drugs. So when we're talking about supplements, what do you think are good ones to consider if our dog's got separation anxiety?
well, I think, and maybe not specifically separation anxiety, but we can talk about anxiety in general. And I think there's a number of supplements that have a good effect on the nervous system. And really, that's what we're talking about. So I mentioned earlier fish oil. I think fish oil is very important. If your dog is vegetarian, they make fish oil. They make those same fatty acids that are found in fish and algae. You can get algal oil, and that can work quite well. We know that one of the fatty acids in algal oil or fish oil is called DHA. We know in puppies it affects the brain so well that it actually improves their training. So using fish oil early on while you're doing that, behavioral training can be very important, as well as just kind of lowering, that level of activity without sedating them, in the nervous system. B vitamins, something very simple. I mean, these days in the world of supplements and pet supplements, everybody's looking for very exotic, hard to pronounce supplements. But B vitamins have been around forever and they work great. And you can even give B vitamins in something else. For instance, nutritional yeast, very, very rich in B vitamins, can have a very calming effect. So looking at oils, fish oils, looking at algal oils, looking at B vitamins, very good. And then I'm an herbalist. I've been an herbalist for many years. I'm actually president of the American College of Veterinary Botanical Medicine. And so we look at using herbs, and there's a number of different versions of how herbs are used. For instance, there is Western herbal medicine where we might want to use something like chamomile or hops or passion flower or lemon balm, very good herbs to help lower the level of anxiety of the nervous system. We call those nervines. There's also our Chinese herbs. Now, Chinese herbs typically are complex formulas with multiple herbs in them, maybe anywhere from 3 to 16 herbs, and they're designed to be used based on a Chinese diagnosis. So when you have a veterinarian or a human acupuncturist who could take your pulses and look at your tongue and palpate different acupuncture points, and that's what veterinary acupuncturists do as well, you can then decide that there may be some things going on in the animal in terms of its traditional Chinese medical diagnosis. Maybe it's got too much heart fire, or maybe it's got too much phlegm in the brain, or that's the language that we use in Chinese medicine. There are herbs that address that once you have that diagnosis. So going to see a TCM practitioner for your pet who's knowledgeable about pets can also be something to kind of constitutionally change the animal so they can be less anxious, and then we're talking about supplements, but to kind of pair that, acupuncture itself can be very calming. I'm not in practice anymore, but I've been doing acupuncture for 25 years in pets. And one of the biggest things that you do when they come into the exam room is you worry about how are they going to be able to stand having 15 needles in them for 20 to 30 minutes. That's a challenge. So you do things like there's certain points. There's a point up here. There's a couple of points in the ears. Oftentimes what I would do, the dog comes in, I just put 1 or 2 needles in because I know they're calming points. Sure enough, they calm that dog. So acupuncture can be helpful. And then getting back to the herbs, there's also our essential oils. I found early on that peppermint oil. Now we know, we think about lavender as being very calming, but peppermint oil itself is supposed to be kind of stimulating. But I found that if I put a couple of drops of essential oil peppermint in my palm and then rub the front paws of the dog in that the heat of the pads would be like an aromatherapy diffuser for the peppermint oil, which the dog would then smell. And within 5 minutes, you could just see it go, I'm calmer now. And then I'd put the point in the head that would calm them more. I'd go out, I'd talk to the owner about this and that. I'd get a history. I'd watch the dog because that tells you a lot about its TCM diagnosis. And then you'd go ahead and use the acupuncture needles. And in some dogs, we wouldn't use the needles. We'd actually make injections into acupuncture points with vitamin B12, especially for dogs that won't tolerate the needles. Use a very, very tiny needle and only like 1/10 of an ml. Sometimes we put homeopathics in that as well. And I'm not a great homeopath, so I haven't really mentioned the use of homeopathy, but there are some very expert practitioners of veterinary homeopathy who could speak much more knowledgeably about the use of homeopathics to help with calming. There are some combination homeopathic formulas that might be, kind of point and shoot. You can buy it off the shelf and give it without having to do that whole homeopathic diagnostic process as well. And then we get to my favorites, to the use of the cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, and to the use of mushrooms, particularly the mushroom that's called reishi and the mushroom that's called lion's mane. But there are many other, like all mushrooms, have been found to have a strong effect on the nervous system. Most mushrooms have a good effect on the nervous system. One mushroom, psilocybin, has a very special effect on the nervous system. We're looking at it now, actually, for generalized anxiety in people and for depression and things like that. I have no experience using psilocybin in dogs, and I can't really speak knowledgeably about it. And I'm not sure I can recommend anybody use it yet because I'm not sure what it's going to do. Got to figure that one out. But once I do, I will be talking about that too. But these other mushrooms, they have these molecules in them which cross the blood-brain barrier and stimulate receptors in the brain that produce serotonin. And serotonin is the neurotransmitter. It's very calming. Some people take tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin. You could give your dog tryptophan as well, which also can help to produce more serotonin, so it's calmer. But particularly, it's the lion's mane mushroom, which is the most popular mushroom in North America, and I would suspect getting to be that way in Australia, although I think there's been, for a while, you didn't have lion's mane in Australia until recently. It's the most popular mushroom because its effect on memory and cognition and stress, and Lord knows we're all pretty darn stressed these days. And then reishi mushroom, is the mushroom of immortality, but it's used by Zen masters. The extract is used by Zen masters as a meditation aid. I made a supplement that combines the reishi and the lion's mane with tryptophan and some of those herbs I mentioned, passion flower and lemon balm and valerian and catnip even, into soft chews for dogs that work really well. And can work well for anxiety. That's with real mushrooms. They call those relaxed mushroom chews. But I found that when you combine that formula or the things that are in it, the lion's mane and reishi, you don't have to use that formula specifically, with CBD or with CBG, which is kind of a CBD on steroids. It's stronger than CBD and also has calming effects like CBD does, that you get an even more substantial response, that the animal's even calmer. That's what I do with Ollie, especially when because we're in Colorado, we've got those thunderstorms coming in off the plains and they hit the mountains and it's kind of noisy here, and Ollie doesn't even like the wind when the wind is blowing. So I give him a bunch of those, and I sit with him, and I pet him, and I talk to him, and close the window so it's not as loud. But that seems to work pretty well for him as well.
Yeah, great. On the topic of CBD oil, because I think particularly in Australia, it's still a bit of a taboo topic, and not many vets can prescribe it. Not many vets want to prescribe it. So does giving your dog CBD oil, are there any side effects that we should be aware of?
Well, CBD oil, if it is just CBD oil, or if it doesn't have the THC in it, is very, very safe. And we've done there's multiple studies that have been published out of the US, there's one out of Italy, there's one out of Japan, that show that it is very safe for pretty substantial periods of time at fairly high dosages. So, but there's a stigma around marijuana, cannabis with THC. And some countries, even, in the United States as well, it's not federally legal in the United States, but each state by state has said to themselves, well, we don't care what the federal government says. As a state, we have the right to create our own laws that make it legal. So that's why in the US, we have it being legal state by state, but not federally. And many veterinarians, because it's not federally legal, are also very nervous about recommending it or using it here in the U.S. This is what I've been doing for years, is teaching veterinarians about how valuable it is, and trying to get some political action going, actually, because the only reason vets can't use it in the States like they'd like to is because when the states passed those laws, they forgot to include veterinarians in the law, in the language of the law, because veterinarians are kind of second-class citizens when compared to the human medical profession with their huge income and everything. We're just the cutesy doctors that like those cutesy little pets. So, so I try to get veterinarians and pet parents motivated to lobby their legislatures to put amendments to the law, which gives veterinarians the right to recommend and dispense and do what they should be doing. Pet parents in the U.S. can go to a gas station and buy CBD, and in Colorado, we have adult use. So anybody with a 21 and year older ID can walk into a dispensary, buy a gummy with THC in it, give it to their dog, and send them straight to the ER. Dogs are uber sensitive to THC, and vets can't tell them how to do that. They can't tell them how to give them the THC safely, because there is a safe way to do it. And that's what I worked out, and that's what I talk about. And I know I take some risks as well. Supposedly there's free speech, but you wonder. But it's hopefully over time, countries such as Australia, which have a very vibrant herbal tradition, will bring cannabis in, for its value, and learn that it's not as risky as the powers that be are concerned about.
Yeah, yep. And so is any type of CBD oil safe for pets? Like in America, can any parent go in, get a treat, and that's going to work effectively on their dog?
Well, if CBD is going to work in that dog, CBD is good stuff, but it doesn't necessarily treat every animal and treat every condition. One reason why CBD works so well and works for so many different conditions is we have a system we have receptors in our nervous system which can actually accept the CBD molecule. And then the CBD molecule activates those receptors and makes them do things like calm down or reduce pain or reduce the epileptic stuff that's going on there. So there's a number of things that it can do. It has a wide range of value. Even there's some studies that show that it also can help with allergies, and itching. So any CBD is fine. The problem is the quality of the product. And because of the profit motive, oftentimes you're not going to be getting a pure product. It might be contaminated with THC. Dogs are super sensitive to THC. They get sent to the ER. In fact, before we had laboratory analyses for THC, when they would capture a smuggled shipment of marijuana, they'd feed it to a dog. And if the dog had this specific reaction to it, which is very unique only to dogs, they had enough evidence they could convict in court. Now, I know dogs are very happy now that we have laboratory analyses for THC, because I don't think dogs like to be high. With animals, it's their survival, So if they can't see well, if they can't hear well, if they're off balance, they don't like that, So that's why I think CBD is good, but you got to watch the THC fraction in there.
Yeah, that's great. We've definitely given pet parents a little bit to think about in terms of what kind of supplements they can look into, maybe even suggest to their vet.
Yeah, well, I think, we have found, I think, that a lot of the stimulation for veterinarians to start learning about integrative medicine comes from their clients. Their clients come in and go, "Doc, do you know about this?" Oh, I don't know. I haven't heard about that yet. That's why I'm so popular as a lecturer to veterinarians, because I lecture all the way from soup to nuts, from the very beginning, introduction to integrative medicine, introduction to the use of supplements and nutraceuticals, and it helps to explain to the vets better. And there's a lot of vets that want to know about it, and the younger vets, they're really into it. So I think, it's only a matter of time before the younger vets kind of allow, the older vets go away and take all their stigmas with them, and the young vets come in, and we start to see a much more acceptance of these kinds of approaches to health.
Yeah, I definitely love when I get to see a new vet at the clinic, because I know I can ask a few questions and maybe just plant a few ideas in their head for them to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if we're going to take something away for pet parents, what do you think the number one tip is in relation to anxiety?
I wish, and I knew you were going to ask me this question, and, I've been thinking about the answer to it. And it's just, there's so many different aspects to pet anxiety. It's hard for me to say just one, but I would say that, and probably we're talking to pet parents who have dogs that are anxious versus pet parents that have just adopted a dog that's anxious. So I would say, talk to your vet about it first. I'm a vet, so obviously I'm going to give that kind of advice and see what if they can offer you some advice as far as behavioral training, the cues, the things I was talking about. You may want to look at the use of some of these calming herbs or some of these calming essential oils, for your dog to help reduce that. If you can find a behavioral specialist, a veterinarian or not a veterinarian, but just a trainer who knows how to do these things, I think that's really your best bet. I think the combination of training and supplements to help making the dog more receptive to the training are probably the best places to start with it. It's frustrating. I have some people I work with, pet parents I work with, that no matter what we do, it just does not seem to help.
Yeah.
I hope that's not your situation.
Perfect. That's great. That's great. So thank you so much, Doc Rob. That was really interesting. And I'm sure our pet parents have taken away some great tips and tricks, and hopefully they go away and maybe Google some different research and studies to see that these supplements really do work and they've been proven. And you got nothing to lose, just to give it a go.
Well, I'm not quite sure how we make this work, and maybe we can't, but I've written an ebook called The Truth About Pet Anxiety, and it has most of this information in it summarized, and also with links to products and resources and things like that. Maybe there's a way we can make that available to your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put links. And so if our audience want to find more about you, can they Google you? Do you have a website?
They can Google me. I have an e-commerce site, which is a nice place. It's called Well Pet Dispensary. And I have a blog site called nurseyourpet.com. I'm in the process of developing a Facebook group, and I'm working on developing some Facebook live events, questions and answering, and doing some coaching. It's all kind of in the developmental process. And that's one reason I'm working with you guys, because I know I can reach a lot of pet parents this way to help get these resources launched and available to pet parents.
That is awesome. So we'll definitely put some links in so everybody can find you, and hopefully that Facebook gets up and running soon and they can join and follow along.
So this has been lovely. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts, my ideas, my humor with you guys. And I look forward to the next time.
That's great. That's great. And look, if our audience want to listen along, they can like and subscribe to our podcast. It helps us to reach more pet parents, helps us to get the message across. That would be great. And we also have the Pet Anxiety Summit coming up. It's in September, so stay tuned for some announcements from Pet Summit.
Yeah, I'll be in that one as well.
Great.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.